what I'm sure is happening is that Ukraine, the General Staff, has done a very good job of preparation. They're continuing to do this. And I think this attack will have the possibility, or maybe the potential, to have a devastating effect on Russian forces. I think the Russians are really at the breaking point themselves. Their logistics system, we see constant reports of arguing and, flat out hatred and rivalry between all the leaders on the Russian side. And if this attack begins to pick up momentum and penetrates dozens of kilometers through Russian defenses, I think it's going to have a psychological effect on other Russian forces as well as in the Kremlin. And so I think the potential for a significant outcome is very real. The sanctions are having an effect. Russian people do not support this fight. They can't say that publicly, obviously, but there's nobody rushing to join the Russian army to join the fight. They absolutely don't want to be a part of it. So there's a lot of training that's been going on in Ukraine as well as back in Germany and in Poland and other places. They're practicing to do this, what we call combined arms, tanks, artillery, mechanized infantry, engineers, and I would anticipate close air support as well. Now, the Russians are not stupid. They know that this is coming somewhere, so they will attempt to preempt it somehow. They obviously have been putting a lot of effort into their own trenches and obstacles and that sort of thing. But I think the Ukrainians will pick the right time and place when the weather, the trafficability of the road, all the conditions are set so that they can bring up more long-range precision weapons that will enable them to make the Crimean Peninsula untenable, going after headquarters, going after ammunition storage sites. This is how you defeat mass, is with precision against those specific targets. That's how you neutralize the advantage, the only advantage that the Russians have. I think there is a lot of speculation, perhaps, that the West is getting weary or getting tired. I'm not so sure of that. I think most nations, including the United States and Germany and UK and France, recognize how important this is. And we want to see Ukraine be successful. We want Ukraine to win. So I would not say this is all or nothing. You remember when the HIMARS first arrived on the scene back last summer and immediately began to have effect, hitting Russian ammunition storage, Russian headquarters. And so the Russians then moved outside the range of the 90 kilometers that those rockets were able to reach. So by now, if in fact Ukraine has received the ground launch small diameter bombs with that 150 kilometer reach, that means more of the Russian headquarters, artillery storage, and transportation networks, those are now going to be in range. And so, with that sort of precision, you really undermine the Russian advantage in mass infantry and mass artillery by taking out the headquarters, taking out the ammunition, and making it difficult for them to move. And this is the kind of operation that they'll be doing, I think, for the next couple of months, what we would call shaping the battlefield. The Ukrainian General Staff has done a terrific job protecting information and conserving the forces that they're going to need when they do inevitably launch this counteroffensive. I think the fighting around Bakhmut was very costly, but it also was necessary. The General Staff could see that they were able to stop Russian forces there in Bakhmut and to bleed them out and to cause them to use a lot of resources without Ukraine having to push its own armored forces into Bakhmut. That's what they're going to need when they do launch their own counteroffensive, which I would anticipate would be on a very narrow front to achieve a decisive effect, much like their previous journalist just reported, to break the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. Crimea is the decisive terrain. You could kill every Russian soldier within 200 kilometers of Bakhmut, and that would not change the strategic setting. But if you liberate Crimea, that changes everything. So the counteroffensive will be aimed towards the liberation of Crimea, and then the rest of the Donbass, I think that comes later. Well, I think the next 2-3 months are going to be very challenging. But at the end of the day, Russia's logistics system only gets weaker, whereas Ukraine's capabilities continue to get better. I just have a sense that things are going to look a lot different and a lot better by the end of spring and summer. The Russians, from the beginning, overestimated their own ability. They underestimated Ukraine's resolve. And they also miscalculated the willingness of the West to stick together to support Ukraine. So because of that, they entered this, of course, the war started in 2014, but the special military operation, which began February last year, they entered that without having properly developed the logistical infrastructure, without adequate troops, without adequate resources, and without a proper coherent command structure or operational design. I mean, so they've been trying to recover from the original failures and poor design ever since, as they go. And so, the way they do that, of course, is by pouring in poorly trained, poorly equipped, and poorly led conscripts and mobilized troops into the meat grinder in order to try and at least stabilize and buy some time. That was not the original plan, obviously, but because the original plan was so poorly designed, they've had to use human bodies to buy time. And also, of course, their strategic bombing effort of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure is also part of this to buy enough time for them to recover. I think that on the Ukrainian side, of course, I know that these soldiers have to be exhausted. This has been going on, the constant pounding, the casualties. But the difference is Ukraine is defending their homeland. I don't think you'd find too many Russian soldiers that actually want to be in Ukraine. But the Ukrainians are defending their home, their families. And they've got 50 nations supporting them. The contact group is meeting again today. Is everything being delivered as fast as we would all want? Of course not. But nonetheless, 50 nations, and nobody is supporting Russia except Iran. So I think I'm actually optimistic. I think if we stick together, if the West sticks together, we could see Crimea, the decisive part of this campaign, being liberated this year. In terms of capabilities that Ukraine needs, I think that the West is by and large providing much of that, but not all of that, and not as fast as it should be. It took too long to get to the decision to provide the Leopards, for example. Fortunately, they'll get there. Probably within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll see a lot of Leopards with trained Ukrainian crews. Enough to create at least 2 or 3 battalions. So a full armored brigade with Leopard, plus Marder, plus Bradley, plus AMX, and all these others. And then the self-propelled artillery that's being provided by several nations. These will make a difference.